So, James, this weekend, big event. What do you think of No King's Day? You going to be participating? You're going to be staying home?
Oh
What's
yeah, buddy. I'm going to be, you know me. I'm going to be with my torch out in the street. I
out
don't
there in
live
the
there,
streets?
so I mean, all these things. When you don't live there, you view these things a little bit differently.
Well, it's not just LA. They're talking about doing this all across the United States and
Well, I know, but I don't live in the
DC
U.S.,
and
so
you don't live in the
that's what I'm
US, right?
saying.
Okay.
Like the things that happen when you're distanced from it, I have more of sort of an academic perspective, as almost as an outsider looking in. Look, I'll be honest. I mean, I always try to be, if anything, as intellectually honest as possible. And a lot of these things, seldom in life do we see things, show things very clearly, one side or the other. I would say that I completely understand the government's position. I don't know when I say the government's position because half of Congress is totally opposed to this. Well, I will say the president's position, and frankly agree that when you have mobs of people that are literally trying to kill, people who are performing their official duties, agents of the government who are performing their official duties, and you have mobs of people that are literally trying to kill them, deface and destroy federal property, free, people that have been apprehended and been arrested and are waiting whatever due process, et cetera. I understand and completely agree with the president's instinct to do something about that. I've been pretty critical of him, and there are a lot of things he's done that I've been supportive of, and a lot of things he's done that I've been totally critical of. This is a case that I think he's absolutely right. He's got to do something, and I don't know enough about the legality of, does he have the authority to send in the National Guard? You and I were talking about this earlier. My only experience with this was when it was right before the Iraq War. I was in the military, and we were all going. It was, honestly, like, our unit went in the summer of 2002. It was the summer of 2002, and the guy was a 3-star general in charge of U.S. Army Central Command. His name was Lieutenant General David McKiernan. And he got everybody together and he said, "We're going to Iraq. We're invading." Bear in mind that the war didn't start for another 6 months. George W. Bush kept going on live television saying, "I haven't made my decision yet." But it was everybody knew it was going to happen, right? They were going into Iraq. And George Bush activated the National Guard, U.S. Army Reserves, and the National Guard. And everybody in the military went, "Oh my God, it's like unheard of. Like, you don't do that unless you're in like World War II. And you've got to have this like massive amounts of troops to do something like that." But that's the only time in my life that I've seen the president activating state National Guard, which is supposed to be state militia. And I think plausibly you can make a legal argument that the president doesn't have the authority. There are plenty of people who argue that he does have the authority. He certainly has the authority to send in Marines, at least if and when he feels like there's an insurrection. And I think if you look at it, if you forget about the personalities, forget about left and right, if you just look at it, strip out all the identifying characteristics and just look at it objectively on its merits and say, okay, there's mobs of people that are trying to destroy federal buildings and kill federal officers. Does that constitute insurrection? I think you could clearly make an argument that it does, and hence, maybe under the president's purview to send in, the Army or the Marines. I mean, they send in the military.
We've had 4 years of broadening the definition of what an insurrection is. So they've taken the bar and put it pretty low in terms of what counts as an insurrection, which is a little ironic.
We've also had 4 years to debate the definition of mostly peaceful. and what that really is. It's funny now. I think there's a lot of people in media that they don't want to. I noticed this in the Wall Street Journal. They like very carefully. They don't want to say mostly peaceful, so that their new terminology is occasionally violent.
Love it.
That's, oh my God. Yeah. Like you just can't make that stuff up.
And we were talking about this other one where they said,
I keep waiting for like some live reporter to be sitting there, "I'm here, and these are," while he's like getting like punched in the face by protesters going, "They're occasionally violent." Like that's the meme that I'm waiting for right now. And
right. Or hours after the peaceful protest ended, cars got lit on fire and, they looted a store. But that was hours after the peaceful protest
exactly,
ended.
Yeah. Well, it started off as peaceful, Joe, is what it is. Which, wars start off as peaceful. Like anything that's not peaceful starts as peaceful, and then it becomes not peaceful. So, that's Pulitzer Prize winning stuff right there. I'm sure. I'm sure the left's going to shower itself with awards over its coverage of this. I can't wait for
Yeah.
that.
My only thing, though, is I like the idea of states having more power. So when I see something that gives the opportunity for the states to maintain more control over their National Guard and be the ones that could call out the National Guard and not have the federal government be involved, to me, that's like a 10, 15-year plan to say at some point, are the states going to be able to step in and protect us from the federal government if things get too crazy? So to set up for that dynamic where the states have the power to actually push back against the federal government, I'm like almost gonna agree with Newsom here when you take it into the court and say the states should have control over the federal government.
That's
I
very
mean, sorry, the
intellectually
states
honest.
should have control over the National Guard.
Over their essentially state militia, right? I mean, that's extremely. I mean, I think it's great that you can make that assertion and find a way to agree with somebody even like Gavin Newsom, who, let's be honest, it's pretty hard to find ways to agree with Gavin Newsom. I don't know that I do, and you and I can disagree. I don't know that I do. I don't know enough about the legality. The commander in chief of all the military is supposed to be the president of the United States. In theory, but I don't know enough about the legal dynamics of it. What I would say is that, again, the president should have the authority to send in the troops. They've done this before. They did it when they reintegrated the schools. After Brown versus the Board of Education, they had to send in the military to make sure that black people were able to go into certain schools in the South. So, this is obviously not what that is, but one could clearly make an argument that when you have U.S. federal officers that are performing their official functions and there are angry mobs that are literally trying to kill them, in some cases funded and organized mobs that are trying to kill them, that merits some level of protection, and that the president has not only the authority to do that, but actually has a legal obligation to protect people that are actually performing their official function in government. So I understand and frankly agree with that position. On the other hand, I have to be intellectually honest. I can at least, I always forget if the word is empathize or sympathize, but whichever one it is, I can understand why there's a lot of people, start off in Los Angeles, they're really, pissed off and angry about that. And there's somebody that I would just say, to protect the innocent, somebody that I'm extremely close with, who is an older lady whose husband passed away, was left all alone, and relied on somebody, so the person that stepped in to take care of her was a guy that was basically an illegal from Mexico, drove her around, did the shopping, all these things that she just simply was not physically able to do. And that guy got deported. Not actually ironically, was one of the 3 people in the history of the Biden administration who got deported. And this guy, so this lady was left without, her caretaker, and just couldn't find anybody else who was able to do that. Maybe at a certain price, she would be able to find somebody who was, in the proper labor market, et cetera. But it was 2022, 2023. That was one of the big challenges. There weren't enough workers. People couldn't find workers anywhere, and to go and, help an old lady out, basically 24/7. That was a tall thing. So I understand somebody like that saying I've lost my caretaker. I'm royally screwed right now. I just really want this person to stay. And I understand that kind of angst. I understand that emotion. I understand people that, somebody might be in the country legally. They've got a relative who's there illegally, but hey, they're not a burden on the system. They're not getting welfare. They're not out committing crimes. What's the harm? Come on, man. This is my cousin. This is my uncle. And I understand that. I get it. I can only imagine the pain of having somebody that you're there, that you live with, a friend, a relative, kind of being ripped from you, especially when that person hasn't, the only thing they've done wrong is, obviously committing the crime of being in the country illegally, to begin with. And I could see somebody going come on, man, go get the criminals. There's bigger fish to fry here. What has my uncle done? He hasn't done anything wrong. And I think, so I get that as well. And it's difficult. And it's really the frustrating thing, because it's actually an easy solution, conceptually easy solution. It's just fix the freaking immigration code.
I was going to say, why shouldn't, this older lady be able to sponsor this immigrant who clearly has a job, who clearly is helping out not a criminal, do a background check. So what you're saying basically is that there should be obvious immigration reform where the people that either have a job already or can get a job or have the skills, like why can't they just come in? Why is it so hard to apply for these legal immigration statuses in the United States? And why is it so hard to change that system? Because you were just saying this earlier, the left and the right, they all agree that there's something messed up about the system. There's not a
Everybody
single
agrees.
person in
If
Congress
you
that
ask
says,
anybody in Congress, say, what do you think about the immigration system? 0 people will say, oh yeah, tip top. We have the best immigration system in the world. Everybody's going to say it's royally screwed. The left comes at it from the, bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. We want more people. We want people to vote for the left, and we want to bring as many of those guys in. That's how they view it. The right, I think, views it more from an economic perspective. It's like, hey, great, let's bring in workers, let's bring in entrepreneurs, let's bring in all these people. They even said this during the campaign. They said we want to have a big wall, but a giant gate, a big door, so that all these people can come through. Great, why haven't you done it? Nobody's done it. Nobody on the left, nobody on the right. And the really frustrating thing to me is, like, I get there's a bunch of people that are emotional. You have somebody, somebody that you love, somebody that you care about, that you feel like you're concerned that person's going to get ripped from you. And just as a human being, I understand that. I'm not in that situation myself. But again, to be intellectually and I think even emotionally honest, I understand that. I also, frankly, understand absolutely the president of the United States feels a priority. They're like, I have to protect people that are out doing their job. These are federal officers that are doing the job that I have ordered them to do, and I have to protect them. I have an obligation to protect them. So I get that too. I also get there's a lot of people that are deranged, and whatever it is that Donald Trump's going to do, they've got to say, nah, he's an evil guy, he's a Nazi, and all that stuff. Then you've got the other people, like your buddy Gavin Newsom. I would tease you for that hardcore now. So your good buddy Gavin Newsom, who everybody's got to use this as an opportunity to elevate themselves. So now Newsom, do you think about all the energy? Maxine Waters. I mean, this has got to be one of the least intellectual people in Washington, D.C. One of these people that went to storm the Department of Education because Elon Musk had his sights on the Department of Education. She's got to go and storm the Department of Education. It's like, you're an old lady. What are you going to do? That's not your job. That's not your role. Your role is to pass laws. And so if you want to save the Department of Education, why don't you pass a law? Why don't you go and actually find political support to create a law? Or maybe as a congressperson, you should go, gee, maybe they have a point. Maybe there's all these crazy things that are happening in the Department of Education that are massive wastes of taxpayer funds. So why don't I, as a congressperson, sit down with my political colleagues and let's compromise and let's figure out where the Department of Education went wrong and how we, what sensible cuts we can make, and let's make a compromise and figure out what needs to be done here. And so she's got to go and storm the Department of Education. Now, what is she doing now? She went last week to go storm the ICE facility in Los Angeles. Hilariously got the door slammed in her face because she didn't have she didn't have the right to be there. But it's like, that's not your job. Why don't you go and get political support and where's the Maxine Waters immigration reform bill? Where's that? Doesn't exist, right? So you have all these politicians, think just all the energy that's wasted. All these politicians now that are like, we got to go and oppose Trump. We're gonna storm the immigration facility. We're gonna storm the all these different places. We're gonna go and spend all this time on Twitter, daring the Trump administration, come and arrest me and all this kind of stuff. I mean, like, what are you, John Wayne? Like, what is this, man? This is like, it's like a Clint Eastwood movie. It's just so counterproductive. All the time and money that's being wasted. All these people that are, they're going to go out in the streets. All the money that's being wasted on this stuff. Instead, what the country really needs, what would solve the problem, is immigration reform. But nobody seems to be interested in doing that. And yet, it's the most obvious thing to the most obvious problem. And the really frustrating part about it is that this is one of the few problems in the United States, and it's a massive problem. Immigration is a massive problem that the United States has, but it's one of the few of these, there's a laundry list of massive problems. You've got Social Security reform and Medicare reform and the deficit and all that kind of stuff. And you expect politicians from different sides to approach a problem like the deficit from completely different views. You have people on the right to say, there's no way you're cutting a penny from the defense budget. And you have other people say, there's no way you're cutting a penny from from welfare. And that's hard to compromise. Immigration, there's like so much room to compromise because both sides agree it needs to be reformed. both sides would probably agree, yeah, we should probably have a path to citizenship for people that are already here and they're law abiding and they're working and they're good people and they're working hard and all that stuff. Yeah, we should probably have an easy way for people to say, hey, you want to come into this country? You want to work hard? You want to work your ass off and contribute and not commit any crimes and maybe even invest and start a business and hire people? Everybody's going to agree. We want those people. Why haven't they done anything about it? This is the one of the only problems the U.S. faces that's enormous, and yet both sides actually agree where there's so much room to compromise. Yeah, on the periphery, there are probably going to be some differences, but they could easily pass a bill to reform the entire immigration system that would sail through Congress and sail through the Senate where both sides would agree on it, and nobody's doing anything about it. And I think immigration, this whole people looking at the Marines and all that kind of stuff, I actually don't think that's the issue. I don't think that's the issue. Like, I mean, I understand both sides of it, but the thing that just makes me want to scream is that this is one of the few problems that America has, that both sides go, yes, we need to fix it, and we actually come at it from the same place. We want hardworking, law-abiding, investing people to come into the U.S. and become residents, become citizens. We want those people. Both sides agree. Nobody's doing anything about it. Totally frustrating. And it just exemplifies the complete and utter failure that is the federal government.
In terms of the compromise to get something like that passed, I have this feeling that people in Congress right now are so desperate to not give the other side a win that they will cut off their nose to spite the face. It's just, as long as the other side doesn't win, I'm okay with losing. And
it's not cutting off your nose. It's I'm going to let America burn. I'm going to watch this country continue to go down in flames rather than actually do my job. And yet, the average congressional representative has like a 92% success rate when they run for re-election. I mean, it's crazy. Like every one of these guys should basically just be thrown out, and you bring people and say, yeah, I'm actually going to fix stuff. I'm actually willing to compromise. I'm actually willing to go and tackle these problems. Nobody ever does.
But that's another question. There's a Republican majority in the House. There's a Republican majority in the Senate. There's a Republican president. They should be able to get their type of reform that they want passed through.
That's the thing. Like, this is why I don't agree with what you said. I don't think it's people that are deliberately blocking this so they can say, it's like, not like the Democrats say, well, we're going to block this so that the Republicans don't have a win. The Republicans saying we're going to block this so the Democrats don't have a win. I don't think that's what it is at all. I don't know why, just whatever intransigence, it's just not a priority, whatever it is, you could easily pass immigration reform, sensible immigration reform, where you say, hey, let's have a path to citizenship to law-abiding people who are already here. Let's create easy ways for somebody. Hey, like this lady I was telling you about, say, hey, you're willing to sponsor somebody, you're willing to put up the funds, you're willing to, whatever, you got to post a, $10,000 deposit. Almost like a post bond for somebody, just in case they go rogue, just in case, whatever. And it's like, this guy gets convicted of crime, like you're on the hook for it financially. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you could do that would frankly be, would kind of boost the government's financial reserves and assets and be beneficial and create fee income and all sorts of things, and that should sail through the House of Representatives. And, in theory, the Republicans don't have enough of a majority in the Senate to prevent a filibuster, but I can't imagine that Chuck Schumer would filibuster sensible immigration reform and be the guy who gets blamed for the fact that, the immigration system didn't get reformed. I think there would be enough people, even on the left, who would go along and say, yeah, of course I'm going to vote for that. Right. And it would be signed, but nobody's doing it. Nobody's doing it. And it's just astonishing to me. It's frustrating enough to see, you don't have support for cutting the deficit. You don't have support for reforming Social Security, all these things that are absolutely crucial to saving the United States. Immigration reform is a big deal, because if you reform the immigration system and you make it easy for people to come in the United States and work hard and save money and invest money and hire people and start businesses and all these things, you have more, by definition, you have more economic growth, which is exactly what the U.S. needs. At the end of the day, it all comes back to saving the economy, saving the government finances, and immigration reform is an easy layup. It is the easiest layup because both sides agree. And if you do this, not only do you prevent, civil unrest and clashes like this in the streets, but you also grow the economy. You grow the economy and you get the government, you actually start to stabilize government finances. You stabilize the deficit situation. You create more economic growth. Everybody wins. Everybody
Okay, so
wins. And
then
they
the new
just
theory
won't
is
do it.
that Congress members are the laziest workers in America. Is it like, honestly, is it laziness? Are they too lazy to do the work that's required to write this bill because they're too busy on TikTok storming ICE facilities,
Well, I
doing
think you
their
got to
campaign
right. You got a lot of
speeches?
people. You got a lot of people. That's, they're busy elevating their profile. I mean, the only thing they care about is just getting reelected. You get into Congress, you don't want to miss out on that gravy train, because how else are you going to find out about which stocks you should buy ahead of the American public? I mean, it's the only job. Nobody goes to work as a McDonald's cashier and gets inside information and super hot stock tips. But suddenly you become a member of Congress, people become it's just exorbitantly wealthy in a very relatively short period of time. Nobody wants to give that up. So you spend your entire time as a congressperson on TikTok spreading the message of, whatever hate you've got to spread so that you get reelected. And in the meantime, nobody actually gets anything done. So I don't know what the reason is. What I do know for certain is that the vast majority of people in Congress are complete nincompoops. They don't understand. They might understand a little bit of something, but I don't think I'm positive most people in Congress, especially in the things that really matter, don't have the foggiest idea. They don't have the foggiest idea about economics. And this is patently apparent every time, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez opens her mouth and talks about something that have to do with the economy, demonstrates without any doubt that she knows absolutely nothing about the economy. And I'm not saying that as a dig. I'm not saying that as like, this is a burn. It's not at all. I mean, it's just a fact. She clearly doesn't understand anything about economics. I don't think Bernie Sanders understands very much about economics. I think there's a lot of people on the right who don't understand. I'm not sure Ted Cruz really understands a lot about economics. I mean, I think these are, I guarantee you, most of the people, almost everybody, the only guy in the Senate and the House of Representatives who probably understands anything about central banking is probably Rand Paul and his father before him when he was in Congress. I think they're some of the only guys that really actually understood central banking. That's a complicated topic. They don't understand this stuff. Most people in government right now, they're saying Powell's got to cut interest rates and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, dude, Powell cut interest rates, last year, and interest rates went up because the central bank, the Fed, is not in control of interest rates. The bond market's in control of interest rates. And the president of the United States doesn't even understand that. JD Vance
Yeah,
doesn't
I
understand
definitely
that.
don't think a lot of people understand that, because before you explained it to me, I assumed that whatever the prevailing interest rate the Fed set would just
People
be the
people
interest rate.
think Jay Powell's going to show up and snap his fingers, go, let the interest rate be X. And the interest rate was X. And Jay Powell looked at it and saw that it was good. But that's not how it works, right? Right? That's not how it works. Jerome Powell doesn't walk across the water and set the interest rates. The interest rate is set by the bond market. And how do we know that? We know that just by looking at what's happened to the bond market just since Liberation Day. I always have to do Liberation Day in air quotes, right? Just since Liberation Day, right? Interest rates went through the freaking roof. Look at what happened to you can Google this yourself. Just like look at a chart of the 30-year Treasury bond yield, and it just right after Liberation Day. The central bank wasn't doing anything. They weren't changing rates. They weren't going like, yeah, let's jack up interest rates. It was the bond market. It was because foreign investors, in particular, China, I mean, they pretend that the Russians don't own bonds, but they do. All these countries that were sick and tired of the United States and say, we're out of here, we're done. They started selling their government bonds, and that flood of government bonds on the market basically adjusted the price of bonds. And essentially the price of the bond is the yield. Yields and bond prices move inversely to one another. So when you have more supply and less demand for government bonds, the price is going to fall. And when the price falls, yields go up. That's how the bond market works. If you look at it, it's actually pretty simple. And so that's ultimately what's driving the bond market. And you've got
Remind me what the Fed does control. What's the number that they actually control? It's just like a interbank lending.
They said there's some policy rates that they control. So they control this thing called the federal funds rate. They control the discount rate. They control some policy rates that banks, use to lend to one another, or they control the rate that the Fed might pay on reserve balances that banks hold with the Federal Reserve, right? Because when you deposit your money in a bank, what does the bank do with that money? They buy bonds, they make investments, they make loans, but sometimes they actually say, well, we don't have anything to do with this money. So they actually put it on deposit at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is like a bank account for banks, right? Just like you deposit your money in a bank, banks might actually deposit some money at the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve will pay them a balance on that. So the Fed sets that interest rate as a policy rate as well. And so when they set policy rates, sometimes the bond market, and when things are kind of going okay, the bond market just sort of, clicks their heels and salutes and says, okay, and they follow along with that. This is not an okay time. So the Fed can't just say, well, we're going to make interest rates X. We're going to set our policy rate at Y. And the bond market's going to, the bond market says, that's great, buddy. And we're just going to keep on doing our own thing, right? I mean, in the same way, if the Federal Reserve said the price of Apple stock will be X, does that mean that everybody in the stock market is now going to buy and sell Apple at exactly that price? No, of course not. People are going to go, screw you, buddy. I'm going to buy and sell at whatever price I think it's worth. And that's essentially what the Fed, when they say the Fed's going to set interest rates, it's exactly the same kind of thinking. It's like, wait a minute, who are these bureaucrats, and why do they get to fix the price of anything? Interest rates ultimately are the price of money, right? That's essentially where the supply of money and the demand of money meet. Just like the supply of Apple stock and the demand for Apple stock meet, that's the price of Apple. The price of money is where supply and demand meet, and that's what the interest rate is. So why are these guys, just an unelected group of bureaucrats, get together and say, this is what we want the interest rate to be, and everybody else is just supposed to go along with that? No, that's ludicrous. And that's not how financial markets work. The bond market decides, right? And what happens is when the Fed really wants to intervene, when they go, oh man, we set interest rates at 3%, but then the bond market's not listening. Interest rates are 6.5%. What are we going to do? Well, this is when they step in, they start printing money, right? This is when they bring in the cavalry, what they call quantitative easing. And so they start printing lots and lots of money, and they use that money to buy bonds, and essentially creating excess demand for bonds, which makes bond prices go up and yields go down. Right? So that's how they actually, if they want to get in and start influencing, they really want to manipulate the interest rate because they want to hold interest rates down. They print money, they don't actually physically print it, but they do it all digitally. They expand the money supply. They call it quantitative easing, and use all this new money. This is what they did during COVID. They I won't say printed, they created trillions and trillions of dollars, and they used that money to buy government bonds. Sometimes they buy like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac housing bonds, but a lot of they buy U.S. government treasuries, and and by basically creating artificial demand for treasuries, they conjure money out of thin air, create artificial demand to buy treasuries, and that creates ultra low treasury yields. This is where we saw, the 10-year, like 30 basis points. It was like complete and utter joke. Suddenly they stopped doing that, right? When they stopped the quantitative easing, interest rates go back up, because now it's like, oh, now it's up to the market to figure out again. Now we don't have the Federal Reserve as this artificial player suppressing interest rates by, creating money and all that stuff. Suddenly it's up to the bond market, and the bond market said, yeah, I'll take the lead here. Thanks very much. And so the bond market is setting interest rates. So it's one of these things. This is a long story to say, very few people in Washington, D.C. understand this. And that includes the people in the White House, because you have the President of the United States tweeting, Jerome Powell needs to cut rates. Dude, it's the bond market that sets the interest rates. Sure, Jerome Powell could make a policy cut, but ultimately, if Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve want to actually, radically reduce interest rates, if we want to see 0% rates again in the United States, they're going to have to print lots and lots and lots and lots of money. And what happens when the Federal Reserve creates lots of money? Well, we found out in 2022 and 2023 and 2024, and it still exists today. We get lots of inflation. We get lots and lots of inflation.
So the Fed can manipulate the interest rates, but what you end up
Absolutely.
with is inflation.
You ultimately get inflation. Mm-hmm. And again, people in Congress don't understand that stuff. And so that goes back to like, why isn't anybody doing anything? Because at the end of the day, I don't think people in Congress understand the things that they vote on. They don't understand Fed policy. They don't understand economics. I don't think they really understand anything about immigration. I don't think they understand most of this stuff.
It can be helpful when you have something to look at to see what the trajectory is. So do you think that the United States is on the same trajectory as Europe in terms of immigration? Because it seems like Europe just threw the doors open and said anyone can come in, and it's not going so hot. Or is the U.S. problem worse? I don't actually really know.
So if you compare the two side by side, they're on the same trajectory. The entire West, in many respects, is just on a really downward slide. And I say that objectively. Europe has really led the charge. If you go back to, for example, the advent of the euro, right at the turn of the century, in the early 2000, early 2000s, and you look at the differences between economic growth in the United States and Europe, it's a vast chasm. It's a vast chasm. Europe was growing some, the U.S. was growing. I mean, it's just a vast, vast, vast chasm. I mean, you look at it, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, per capita GDP in the United States has substantially outpaced per capita GDP growth in Europe and in Canada and in a lot of other places that you would kind of consider the West. And there are very clear reasons for that. And at the end of the day, the reasons why are just really, really bad policy. And the home of bad policy started in Europe, but now it's in the United States. And in many respects, the U.S. and Europe are sort of on just different sides of the same coin. And it's a coin that's sort of very quickly rolling downhill. So, they're both emblematic of a general decline in Western civilization. And it's something definitely worth talking about if you want to go into it.
Well, I am curious because it seems like you earlier you were saying that people are protesting in the streets in favor of lawlessness. And
Yep.
that's not a trajectory that is, like we talked about, there's plenty of good points about immigration and how it can be reformed. But when the hill you're going to die on is being able to break the law, that seems like a bad
Yeah,
trajectory.
you have a lot of, again, I think you got a lot of people that are there because they've got a loved one, they've got somebody, whatever who's important to them that's at risk of being deported. You have other people that are just completely deranged, and their whole view is we should have open borders and everybody should just come in and criminal, terrorist, whatever, it doesn't matter as long as they vote for the left. And yeah, it is a little bit weird to say, okay, so you're shutting down the Hollywood freeway to advocate for people's right to break the law. And it's just astonishing to me. It's one of those things. It's kind of hard to make up. It's like a really bad, like if like Marvel did a multiverse movie about V for Vendetta, where like V for Vendetta is like the whole thing in the end. You have people come out in the streets protesting, against the government, but it's like you're protesting against, like, you want the right to break the law, but you want the right for like these people over here to be able to break the law and come across the border. And it's a little bit odd. In my opinion, nothing outdoes what Europe has done to itself, though. And I think, it started some years ago. I remember when I was getting out of the army and I was just kind of getting my start in business, and I was kind of traveling all over the world, and I met some people, and they were doing solar powered, they were doing basically solar fields in Germany. And I remember, like, when somebody told me that, I actually laughed out loud because I thought it was a joke. It's like, what are you talking about? The sun doesn't shine in Germany. That's the dumbest place in the world. You could do. And they're like, no, you get lots of subsidies for this. It's like you can't lose. You can't possibly lose money. You can make a fortune doing solar fields in Germany because the government's ponying up so much money. And I don't know exactly when it started, but at some point along the way in Europe, the high-level policymakers decided to bend the knee at the altar of climate change. And, again, like, I'm all for clean air and clean water, and I have little kids, and I certainly would love to, leave this world literally, and hopefully the planet be slightly better off for my kids and all those things. And I like all that stuff. I also think that a lot of people that are in the climate fanaticism camp we were talking about ignorance. I think some of these people are the most ignorant people ever. Like they take some of the most obvious solutions and they reject them and they ignore them. And I always say, like, I'll start taking you seriously when the words coming out of your mouth are actually factual and correct. You actually start looking at the science of all these different things, including, we talk a lot about nuclear power. And if your whole goal is reduce carbon emissions and all these things, it's just, what a great solution. Your solution is, let's go mine more cobalt and all these different minerals that are like incredibly dirty, and slave labor and child labor and all this stuff. But hey, I have solar power, I have my wind power, and my batteries and all this stuff. And you feel like a good person, never mind like the 9-year-old kid in Africa who's responsible for that, breathing in all this toxicity and stuff like that. And anyways, people, and they fly on their private jets to the climate conferences, whatever. And it's a joke. It's a joke. And I just, as an intellectual person, I just can't take it seriously. But Europe went all in on that, and they did it to the detriment of their own economy. So they, in doing so, and bending the knee to the altar of climate change, they created energy shortages. right? They shut down the nuclear power plants. They shut down like all these things that made sense. They went all in on wind and solar, which created energy shortages. And when there was energy, created skyrocketing energy prices. So everybody's cost of living went up. Inflation soared because the price of energy factors in the price of everything. So if you have higher energy prices, the higher energy price is going to create more inflation. Everything else is going to be more expensive. Transportation is more expensive. Fuel is more expensive. Food becomes more expensive. Everything becomes more expensive because of high energy prices. And Europe went out of its way to say, we want higher energy prices. Then you had, industries that rely on energy, like, I don't know, the automotive sector, which is a big deal in Germany, heavy manufacturing, all this sort of stuff in Germany. And also electricity cost is one of their biggest input costs, aside from labor, is the cost of energy, cost of electricity. Electricity prices went through the roof. What happened? They started shutting down their factories. They shut down their factories. They laid off all these people. You have fewer jobs. You have less economic output. You have higher prices. There's a word for that. It's called stagflation. And Europe brought it on itself because they bent their knees at the altar of climate change. And then they said, geez, you know what? We haven't screwed ourselves enough. How else might we possibly screw ourselves? So what do? They said, I know, let's open our border to every place we can find, and let's bring in people who won't respect our culture, won't respect our civilization, won't respect our laws. People are going to be a drag on people are going to be a public burden, drag on public housing, drag on public health care. People are going to commit all kinds of crime. They created, a rape crisis in Sweden. They created all sorts of crazy things all over the country. And then the politicians didn't want to admit to it. So after completely wrecking their civilization and importing all these people, they're out in the streets. I mean, we've all seen these videos of these guys in cities in Europe, head to toe in garb, demanding, screaming Allah Akbar in the streets, demanding Sharia law in London, and you have the liberals and people left going, oh, hooray for our diversity. Meanwhile, people that are actually citizens of those countries going, man, I'm sick of this shit. Enough is enough. And so then the European leaders said, how else might we screw ourselves? We've wrecked our economies. We've wrecked our civilizations. What else can we do to destroy ourselves? I know, let's destroy our freedom as well. So they started passing hate speech laws and, all kinds of internet censorship. So you can have people out in the streets that want to smother and displace your entire civilization, but you're not allowed to be upset about that, right? Because we have to be, careful and sensitive about the feelings of the people that want to erase you off the planet. So, if you go and post a meme, God help you, then the cops are going to show up to your house and take you away and arrest you. And, and then like when these, somebody actually, one of these people comes in, they go and they commit a crime and they start stabbing kids or run down kids in the street. The police go out of the way to protect the identity of the assailant because we don't want to leak out that it might actually be one of these migrants, right? And then if somebody goes and starts posting like, oh, it was one of those migrants, and they go and arrest that guy for hate speech, and so they took away people's, they took away their, a healthy economy. They took away, they took away their basic civilization. They took away their freedoms. They took away everything. I mean, like European leaders are constantly coming up with ways to go, how can we possibly screw ourselves even more? And then the last thing they said is, you know what? We've screwed Europe so many ways, and people are going to vote us out of office. So then what do? Then they started taking away elections from people. They took away the economy. They took away civilization. They took away their freedom. Then they took away the democracy. And they said, oh, this whole political party in Germany, no, we have to outlaw this. We got to start throwing people in jail. We've got to blast them as far right. Those are Nazis. We have to go to court and prevent these people from being on the ballot. In Romania, they just said, no, that guy didn't win the election. No. We're going to tell you who won the election. I mean, the people that claim to love democracy the most are always the ones who are first in line to subvert it. And they just keep coming up with new ways to destroy themselves. I think it's just a different side of the same coin of this decline of Western civilization, where you have a handful of people at the top who think that they know how to live your life better than you do. You're not capable of making your own decisions, so we're going to make all the decisions for you. And it turns out that all the decisions they make are incredibly destructive. They've impoverished people, they've made everybody worse off, the economy, the civilization, everything. And I think now what you have, at least in Europe, a lot of people have woken up to this. I think they've realized that the people in charge are absolutely destroying them. It's a little bit different in the United States because then you have these people in the streets that are protesting for the right for other people to be able to commit crimes and come into the country illegally. So it's definitely a different side, but it's the same coin of this essentially decline in Western civilization. And I have to imagine if you're China, or Russia or Iran or any of these kind of adversary nations that sort of on its comeuppance and on the rise, I have to imagine you're looking at this going, we couldn't have planned this better. I mean, if you're the CCP, you're just thinking about, we don't have to do anything. Forget about floating the balloons over America and the drones and the cyber attacks, whatever. We don't have to do anything. We just have to sit back and just watch these people destroy themselves. We don't have to spend a dime. We get to do these little things. I don't know if you saw the news about this. What's that app where they have the store that sells everything really cheap? Is it Temu or something like that?
Yeah, that's one of them. There was another one as well.
And it turns out it's like loaded with spyware. You have this. I mean, if you have this app, you might want to check it out. And there's all these things that like it goes in, it has access to. It overrides all the controls in the app stores and in Google and the Apple App Store. And it overrides all these controls, and it gives itself access to all this biometric data, your files, your photos, all these things that, of course, just beams it right back to the CCP. And so it's one of those things that go, well, hey, if Americans want to go and download all that spyware and voluntarily put it on their phones and give us access, sure, we'll take it. But at the end of the day, we don't have to do anything because these people are absolutely destroying themselves. And we're just going to sit back, kick back, and watch it happen. And that's pretty sad. It's really, really sad. Again, when you look back at this and say, it's easy to sort of make this some easy reforms to make that both sides should agree on that get the ball moving in the right direction. Nobody wants to do it. Instead, it's grandstanding on Twitter. It's riots in the streets that are sometimes violent, but mostly peaceful. And, I mean, the media coverage, all this stuff is just a joke rather than like nobody sort of honing in on like the key issues. Like, why don't you just fix it? And then we don't have this problem, just fix it. And nobody seems to want to do it. And it's astonishing and really irritating.
And you do see the reforms in other places, not just China, but you were mentioning how Victoria is in Turkey right now with some of our total access members. And in Turkey, they're implementing these policies like basically buy a house, get a passport.
Buy a house and get citizenship. Yeah.
It's a $400,000 investment, which real estate applies to, and you can get citizenship in Turkey, which is sort of an up and coming, like not quite neutral, but one of these countries that's not trying to get involved in World War III necessarily.
I mean, to each their own. I mean, she was actually texting me. I mean, a lot of people are they're having a great time. They're on some resort on the Black Sea right now. And people are like, wow, this place is like really amazing. It's cheap. $400,000 goes a long way in terms of real estate, And so, I mean, everybody gets to make their own decisions. But the point is that most other countries in the world have gone out of their way. I mean, we were talking about this earlier, places like Panama that decades ago created this program. They said, we want to attract certain people to come here, right? So they said, we know this is a nice place, easy place, tropical, inexpensive. So let's see if we can attract retirees to come into this country so they can spend their money and that'll help grow our economy. So they wrote this specific legislation to attract people, to make it easy for them to come into the country and all this sort of stuff. Lots of countries do that. They make it easy for investors, for business people, for skilled workers, for all sorts of things. They make it super, super, super easy to come in, and they're better off for it. The United States just doesn't do that. I mean, the last thing that it did was now this, gold card, where if you come in and you go and invest money in the country, and it's somewhat vague in terms of what qualifies for that, whatever. But I mean, I think that it leaves a lot of opportunity for some shady stuff to go down. But supposedly you invest all this money in the United States, you can come in. That's a step in the right direction. But it's like a drop in the bucket in terms of bringing in hardworking people, skilled people, entrepreneurial people. You're not even scratching the surface. I mean, if you actually tried, you would bring in. I think you would bring in millions and millions of people in a way that are hardworking, law-abiding, investable. A lot of these guys, with money, with cash, with investment to do things, start business, create jobs, all that stuff, and they just won't do it. They just won't do it. And every other country is doing it. Even China has started to reform its immigration system because they understand, because of their idiotic one China policy, they've got a totally ass backwards demographic pyramid, and they've got to fix it. And one of the only ways, there's two ways that they know of that they can do that. One is robotics, and two is immigration. And they're working hard on the robotic stuff and making a lot of, frankly, scary advances. And the other is on the immigration side. And they've actually gone and reformed a lot of things. They try to clean up their cities and clean up the, the air quality and, all these different things. I don't think that there's all that many people that want to move to China, but they're at least trying. They're at least trying. And in the US, you've got this easy layup. Nobody's doing anything about it. Totally beyond
Yeah.
frustrating.
I was in Vietnam recently, and they're actually talking about doing a golden visa in Vietnam, which would be pretty cool. And when you go to Da Nang, in the center, you see so much being built. That's where all the expats like to go. And
Yeah, it's
just
beautiful
standing on the
coastline.
beach,
Yeah.
you see like 6 new buildings going up. Is just so much going on there, and you're like, wait, this is a communist country? Obviously, it's not, but they're still ruled by the Communist Party, and you start going, I live in the free country, in the the freest country in the world with capitalism and all that, and the communist country that we tried to stop the spread of communism in Asia. That one's doing better, not doing better, but growing faster at this point than the United States. It's
You just have a lot of other governments that get it, and they have to get it out of necessity because they're not the reserve currency. They can't just go to financial markets and clap their hands and people shower them with trillions of dollars. Nobody's out there to finance Vietnam's $2 trillion annual deficit, right? So they've got to figure it out on their own, and it forces them into sensible policy. And in many respects, the success of the United States has given people in Congress, the government in general, a sense of complacency that they don't have to do these things. They don't have to make the hard decisions, and they can just sort of coast on the hard work that previous generations, came before them in government, and the smart decisions that were made, and all that goodwill that was built up. And we've been talking about this for a while. Like, that's coming to an end, man. It's coming to an end. It's like we can see the early stage of that unfolding in front of our eyes. It's not some cataclysmic, the end of the world is nigh. That's not what it is. But it's obvious that we seem to be, and it's not irreversible, but we're obviously right now clearly on this trajectory of U.S. financial dominance vis-a-vis being the U.S. dollar being the global reserve currency. That's coming to an end, and that carries some massive implications that we've talked about before in these conversations.
Well, and one of them, people look at the rise in the gold price and say, is this that's a symptom of what's already going on, where the reason that gold has been going up, and you've said this a million times, is because central banks are diversifying out of the US dollar and into gold because it's just a universal asset that everybody accepts has value. And that's why gold has gone up so quickly.
I've been writing about it for 12 to 18 months, probably 18 months. I mean, since 2023, I think. We've been talking about it since we started doing these podcasts last year. We've been talking about this. I mean, when gold, gold's at 1,500, we said this is crazy cheap. Gold crossed 2,000, we said it's going higher. You just got to understand why. 2,500, 3,000. I mean, all along the way, we kept saying there's a reason why this is happening. It's not just wanton speculation. It's not algorithmic traders bidding the price of gold. It's central banks that are getting very nervous about their US dollar holdings. They own trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars of US government bonds, let alone other US dollar assets. And they want to get out of those bonds in particular and other US dollar assets and into something else. Well, what's the asset that you can hold that has universal value around the world? Doesn't matter if you're in Brazil or Bangladesh, everybody values gold. And it's there are other assets like that. People value oil and they value, whatever, natural gas, all sorts of things. Gold just happens to have, it's a really dense form of wealth. We talked about that before, the amount of gold, the amount of sort of economic value in the amount of gold that's sort of the equivalent of like a barrel of oil, whatever, $60, $65, gold, it's like tens of millions of dollars in that same sort of volume. So you can transport a lot of wealth very easily. It's a large market that goes into the trillions of dollars, so you can move a lot of money. You can move hundreds of billions of dollars in and out of the gold market if you have to. So there's very few assets that sort of meet those qualifications, and gold does. And that's why the central banks have been buying gold. The opportunity that we identified, and we were practically shouting it from the rooftops, is that central banks are buying gold. They're not buying gold companies. They're not buying gold miners, not buying gold royalty companies, not buying gold drillers. They're buying gold, physical gold bars, mostly just bars, not even coins, right? So the opportunity that we've been shouting at everybody who was willing to listen was there's this absurd opportunity in gold stocks and other real asset stocks that were crazy undervalued. And I have to say, we were right. We were right about that. I mean, we've got some of these picks that are up, you know, I
Oh,
mean,
over the last few months, especially, we've really been proven pretty correct on that. So actually, I'm looking at it right now. Just the last few were up 133%, 152%, 50%, 34%. One from
yeah,
11 months ago. Those were all a few
slackers,
months. That
slackers.
was well, it's just over the course of 2, 3, 4 months. One
Yeah.
that's over the course of 11 months is 153%.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too is you mentioned how it's other things. There's a lot of precious metals companies in the portfolio that we've researched, but there's also other real asset companies. It's not just precious metals.
Mhm.
And there's currently 19 open positions. 14 of them are positive. And the uh, average return is 34%. That's the average. And
34%.
obviously the highest I just mentioned are 153%. And then the lowest is down 27%. There's a couple down. Obviously, that's always going to happen.
Yeah.
But overall, that's a pretty good average, I'd say. I'm
Yeah,
happy
no,
that I
I
invest
think
along with it.
I think the trend, I think the trajectory is right. I think the obviously the movement, the call was spot on. You know, I think the reality is there used to be a lot of these. There used to be a ton of these. We could see this one, this one, this one. I think the few that are down, you know, our chief strategist Carl is pretty ruthless, and you know, and if he thinks, you know, the business is weak or the management's not good or whatever, he would cut it immediately and say, you know what, we should take the loss and move on from this. Frankly, I think the ones that are down are just even more undervalued than they were before. And you know, we're still finding some in the same way. They're not as many, they're not as abundant as they were, but we're still finding some. The last edition that we put out in our investment newsletter, the fourth pillar, Carl put out one where you've got a profitable, I think even dividend paying, correct me if I'm wrong, gold company that was trading for less than the amount of cash they have in the bank. And that's,
Yeah.
you know, that's talk about undervalued. That's pretty undervalued, you know.
Well,
There's a
I
lot
like
of
the way
things.
you look at businesses and you say, you know, if you were to buy the entire thing, what would happen? That's how you look at the value of it. So if you bought this entire business, pocket the money, business was free, continue
Right.
operating and
Right.
take that money in.
You buy the whole company. You say, great, I'm going to write you a check. Then you drain the company's bank account, take the entire purchase price, put it back in your pocket, and you have the entire business for free. That's putting more money in your pocket every year. You know, that feels like a good deal, you know? And so that was in our most recent edition. So, you know, we're talking about this because we've been talking about it for a long time. We kept saying, this is a big deal. You're going to want to get into this. You're going to want to know about these companies. You're going to want to understand this trend. We were right. We think this opportunity is still present. It's not as, you know, the opportunities aren't as abundant as they were, but there's still some of these companies that are out there. So we just want to put it out there. We're very, very proud of this. Very proud of this research. We think it's excellent. Just want to make sure people know about it.
And we did decide to do one more quick opportunity to get the publication for a discount. So that's just a flash sale that we're doing just
not
this
the
week.
same one, not the same discount that we offered before.
No.
Well, we think it's a very, very fair price. We'd encourage people to check it out. And I think we can probably go ahead and leave it at that. So let's leave a link at the
Thanks,
bottom in
James.
case people are curious.
Absolutely. Links will
Bye,
be
bud.
in the description. All right.
Okay. Take it easy.
Bye.